I know that this is one of the cool things that happen as soon as a tier is being released. Players jump and check things like these to start pointing out, hey, look at this spec, hey, look at this other spec, oh, looks like these guys are OP this tier. Even though it's just been a couple of days, even though people will try to raise their hands and tell you that this is early, it's just normal, it's just heroic, and whatever other excuse, players will still go along and check out these things. So what we're doing today is also checking out these things, but trying to explain why certain things here are happening. Like, for example, Affliction Warlock gapping everyone, you know, by like 8% damage in heroic Manaforge Omega, for example. So let's start, of course, from the obvious. The obvious is that at the beginning of this season, most, let's just say 96% of these results are done without tier sets. Because the only way for you to have gotten a tier set, of course, either you have been spoon-fed by your raid leader all the tier pieces, or you have gotten a tier piece from your vault of last week. You have gotten already the Mythic Plus rating, for example, to get your second Catalyst charge, and you start the season with 1 charge, so you have 2 charges to transform anything you looted, for example, from Mythic Plus into a tier piece, and then the last piece you would have gotten from the raid. So you would have gotten your 4 pieces for your 4-piece set bonus, but that would still have been at the end of the raid, right? Once you have gotten your tier token at the end of the raid. So this would still have been done without tier pieces. And this is quite relevant, because if we go to our finally released Sims from Olria, you can see the DPS difference from your Undermine tier to your Manaforge Omega tier and the amount of damage you gain. Now, a disclaimer in these tier pieces that you do have the Manaforge Omega at about 5 to 6% higher damage just because of the item level. The Season 3 4-piece set bonus compared to the Season 2 4-piece set bonus. If you look at the actual Sims themselves, you can check out the 4-piece of Season 2, and then you check out the gear, and you see the item level is 685. And then you go back up, this time you check the Season 3 4-piece, you check the gear, and the item level is 691. Basically because all of the tier pieces have been simmed at higher item level. So these damage increases do have some 5-ish% damage increase just from the item level. But even with the extra 5%, you can see how much more powerful they are compared to Season 2, right? Season 2 was already giving you 10, 12, 13% even for the stronger specs damage increase compared to not having a tier piece. And then the new season is an extra on top of that. For example, Unholy DK is gaining, for Rider is gaining 23% damage increase. So even if you cut 5% of this from the item level increase you get here, it will be an 18% gain compared to this tier, which already was like a 13% gain from not having a tier piece. That's how strong it is. So obviously, when you look at these results, you're wondering, Affliction, Demo, LA, Outlaw, Shadow Priest, even if you go back to normal, which is much more, of course, populated compared to Heroic, you have still Affliction, Elemental, Demo, Arcane Mage, and then you check their tier set, right? If you look at Affliction, their tier set is shit. Not a lot of their power is funneled from their new tier set. If you also cut this from the item level increase, it's basically a 2% and a 4 or 5% damage increase from the new tier pieces. Then you also have at the top, you have Elemental right now playing Farseer, and Demo playing Diabolist. You have Elemental, Farseer, it's a 15% damage increase. You have Demo playing Diabolist, it's a 10% damage increase. This means that for the other specs, who instead of gaining 10%, they gain 25%, or 27, or 21, or 24, or 28, or 21, or 27. They will gain a much bigger jump once they have their tier set, right? For example, we made the example of Unholy DK, right? So right now, Affliction is here, but once they complete their tier set, they gain 7% damage. Meanwhile, Unholy gains 23% more damage. And the gap right now between the two is 10% damage. So Affliction will gain from 10%, they will go up 17%, but Unholy will gain 23% because of how more powerful currently the tier sets of Unholy are compared to the tier sets of Affliction. So not only this is not that relevant because we're still talking about normal, or we are talking about heroic, what is even more important than just the raid difficulty being simple, because at the end of the day, even if the raid is simple, you can still consider them like a target dummy, right, for testing your DPS. And to be fair, it's not that heroic is simple right now. Many of the bosses starting from Soul Hunters are pretty tough, especially the last 3, even more especially the last 2 are very challenging. If you look at the logs we mentioned, we have few for heroic compared to normal, but already if you go up to Fractillus, you have barely a few in the hundreds of the more popular ones, and then you enter Nexus King and you have like, how many are these? 4 guilds worth of logs being public in Warcraft logs. So even if they were easy bosses, you could have still checked the default damage of the specs, but then you have to account for the wildly different swings in damage you will get from Season 2 to Season 3 based on the power of your tier set. Yes, we do have some memes here and there. Some of those are very small, some of those are possibly even in the negative compared to last season. So that is the first take to point out. In the next few days, as you check more and more of these logs, this will become more relevant, of course, because more guilds will be done with their splits and assign their tier pieces, and then this will go away completely by next week. By next week, most players will be able to get a 4-piece set bonus. You have gotten the chance of a tier piece in this vault, you will get it in next week. You have 2 catalyst charges already, so really just 1 tier piece from the raid, either this week or next week, should guarantee you getting a 4-piece set bonus. So this will be more in line with the damage increases of your tier set. Okay, now what could be said though, if you look at these results, as we said, they are pretty trivial when it comes to DPS because of the lack of tier sets. What about the ones for healers? Well, the situation is about the same, possibly even slightly worse, because we said, well, at least the DPS have a target dummy to hit. So at least they can simulate doing the max damage that they can, right? However, healers can't even do that. Especially in normal, there is simply not enough damage for you to be healing anything relevant. These were, for example, 2 of the splits we did yesterday in normal, and these numbers are low. These HPS numbers are even far lower than you would do basically in Mythic of last season. The average HPS throughout all bosses in Mythic last season was 3.1 million HPS. And here you have basically like 1, maybe 2 bosses that can go past requiring that level of healing. And even then, of course, it's gonna be dependent on how many healers do you have in your group, of course. Because if you are going for the classic 30-man group to try to maximize your tier tokens, then you can even bring 6 healers, which will further spread the HPS around and massively increase the overhealing. Like if you look at, for example, Araz, which was a boss that basically lasted for barely 3 minutes, had the healers rack up an average 70% overhealing because they were just blasting heals into nothing, because there were just nothing to heal. So this is very little relevant, just in case some players were starting to think that Resto Druid is awful because of this, or even more, Discipline Priest is terrible because of this. No, this is irrelevant. Now, Heroic is more relevant, as we mentioned, because the bosses are actually difficult. The bosses are actually kind of tough, even just in healing requirements. But even if they were, we haven't even gotten to that point, as we just shown by the amount of logs. For example, Soul Hunters. Look at this. This is not many guilds having public logs of Soul Hunters Heroic anyway, so you can't draw a conclusion about this regardless. So the TLDR is that these are even less relevant than the numbers of the DPS, because yes, even for them, while you might not have as easy of a picture of the damage increase from tier sets that you have from the DPS, for healers you still have some clue of the power of their tier sets. Like Mistweaver, the 4-piece together is like 17% heal increase, for Holy Priest is like 11% heal increase, and for Preservation is even more, because their tier set will be very powerful. It will even change the way you want to set up your cooldowns as an evoker. So this will be very relevant, even more so than the ones we have seen for the DPS. So just a tiny disclaimer in case some players were starting to think that certain specs were after all very good because you're seeing them here, or terrible because you're seeing them here just because of these results. You would be wrong. Yeah, okay. Technically, you can find some similarities if you look at the raw just default simulated DPS, and you check out the fact that Arms Warrior and Ret are towards the bottom, for example, or also Beast Mastery is also towards the bottom, and then you check these results. Where is Ret? Where is Arms? Where is Beast Mastery? So okay, there is some similarities here. The specs are not doing too well. The specs supposed to be at the bottom are not doing too well, but it is not all that conclusive. It's a mix of the specs themselves not supposedly doing well in Season 3 with their full power, max item level and tier sets, and then certain specs doing slightly worse or better than they are simply because they haven't gotten their new tier pieces, and in some cases not getting it shows up as doing more damage simply because there are going to be way other specs gaining much more damage than them once they have their tier set complete. On a side note, now that we also have these sims, we can also answer the question who should be getting PI in your groups. So the FYI for all priest players, including healers, who are wondering who to give the PI to. The answer is Devastation Evoker. The answer is Flame Shaper Devastation Evoker, who will gain over 5% damage increase from PI. Yes, technically there are other specs that are above, like Enhancement Shaman is above Flame Shaper Evoker. You also have specs like Survival as Sentinel, which is doing very good damage increase. You also have specs like Feral Druid as Wild Stalker, getting quite a good increase from PI, Affliction as well. But these specs are bad. Either they are bad or they are just not played enough compared to Devastation Evoker as Flame Shaper. For example, finding in the raid a Survival Hunter playing Sentinel to give them PI, or an Affliction Warlock playing Soul Harvester with PI, it's likely going to be much less popular and common than finding a Devastation Evoker. That's going to be your PI target. But what was more the point of the video is to just highlight the fact that after we have checked the first results in the raid, what is more relevant was to point out that most of this, actually all of this, will change by the beginning of next week, the beginning of next reset, and it will have much to do with basically acquiring your 4-piece set bonus from this new season, and many of these specs gaining a much higher damage bump because of that tier set going up much more compared to certain specs who are essentially peaking in high school. These specs are all peaking in high school. These guys are all late bloomers, working hard, starting a career, studying for 10 years, doing the grind before they can start earning later on. And then these specs, they were the bullies, the chads, the quarterbacks in high school, and then they will end up flipping burgers at McDonald's, which will be the end of Affliction Warlock in like a week. So that was the highlight of today when it comes to the current day one, I guess day 1.5 in an A performance in the raid of specs, both for DPS and for healers. So for today, on this Thursday, this is what we had to point out when it came to the performance of the specs in the raid. So with this being said, we can now leave each other. I will leave you to the rest of your day, presumably of grinding Mythic Plus keys. So with this out of the way, we're starting the goodbyes as usual by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, I don't know why I have such bad timing. Whenever I start a video and I turn to my right to drink something, and I realized my bottle is empty again.